Welcome to another Humpday Q&A.
It's another week. It's another Wednesday, and we're having a good time here, answering your questions, talking to really cool people. We've got people on today. Simon will get to that in a second. I'm Randall Schwartz. I'll introduce myself more later. That's Simon over there, who's the head honcho.
Let's just dash through our beginner slides and get going.
Indeed, we got plenty to talk about.
So welcome to the stream. Randall, do's and don'ts.
Yeah, so be nice. This is a nice place for people to hang out and get interaction that is constructive and useful to everybody. So we like that, and you will like that as well. Do not post anything adult or rude or offensive. Don't advertise or promote anything. Don't spam. So if you keep seeing the same thing, if you keep posting the same thing in the live chat, you will be silenced. We have that kind of power. Do not harass anybody. We don't tolerate that. We make you go away from not just here, but a lot of other places. So be careful. Be good and have a good time.
My name's Simon Lightfoot, Flutter Community Leader, CTO at Dev Angels London, and you can follow me on Twitter at Dev Angels London. Randall.
And I'm Randall Schwartz. I am a Google developer expert about Dart and Flutter since before they even had a name for that, which is pretty cool. And I also am a full-time Flutter developer. And I'm the question magician for this show. What that means is I am watching the live chat, and we have a number of people in the chat. That's always true. A number is always true. So we have a number of people in the chat. And I'm watching for Q colon in front of the chat questions. And that means that I will put them in our queue. Bad alliteration there. Our queue to be able to answer that by us two, and our wonderful panel, whoever happens to be joining us. And Simon, you've got more on that too.
Yeah. So I'm afraid Scott can't make it today. He's still feeling unwell. He's fighting off the big C. But we have a few guests with us. So let me introduce the stream. Let's get our screen working. There we go. Vivek, welcome to the stream. How's it going?
Hey, thanks, Simon. Thanks, Randall, for inviting me here.
Do you want to give us a little bit of introduction, a bit of your background?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Flutter Dart and GDE. Yeah. What else?
So I work as lead mobile developer at Zestmoney. So Zestmoney is one of the leading BNPL companies here in India, and I'm building their mobile ecosystem. And apart from that, as you said, Flutter GDE, Flutter and Dart GDE, and then I'm also organizer of Flutter Mumbai, Flutter India. So we organize Flutter events here, and we did Flutter Forward Extended as well. In fact,
nice. How did that go?
That was awesome. I mean, we were houseful and we didn't had places for people. Everybody enjoyed it, and also we didn't had so much swags to give out to people, but people were happy to interact with everyone. And we had opened a job portal kind of thing, so it was kind of interacting event. A lot of students came there, a lot of people were very new to Flutter, and a lot of them were looking for a job. Then there was companies who were looking for Flutter developers, so it kind of mixed up, and it was one of the awesome events that we had done under Flutter Mumbai.
Cool.
And we have another surprise guest, Craig. Welcome to the stream. There you go.
Hey everybody, good to be here.
Is that a catalog home behind you?
Yeah, what's that show, The Family Arrested Development, where they have like the fake homes as their business? Yeah, I live in one of those. Yeah.
So we're all here to answer your questions. This is the normal show format. So as we said, get your questions in the chat with a lovely queue in front.
Yep. Craig didn't really introduce himself, although we all know who he is.
Sorry. I'm sure everyone knew who he was. So Craig, go on and introduce himself.
We know.
Well, I'm like Flutter a lot. Been using it for a minute, and I'm a developer relations engineer. You might see me on the Flutter YouTube channel, muddying up your YouTube feed, and here I am again. You can't get rid of me.
Yeah, I saw you last week on the brick thing where we were making mason bricks, and I built my first brick and published it yesterday. Yay!
Nice.
incredible.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun.
Yeah. Make sure you tell Felix that too.
I did.
Nice. And for the Felix, the creator of this package, Mason, that we talked about last week.
Yeah.
You're getting used to all this like live video stuff. I see. Is the stress high, or are you okay? You're getting well with it, Craig? Like less preparation, right? It's like you have to submit your notes for approval.
Oh, this is being a guest is easy peasy. Simon has to do all the work. Randall does all the work. I just show up.
Fun times.
I just push buttons. I'm a monkey button pusher. That's all. I'm just the guy that does that. Yeah.
Vivek and I are just coasting.
That's right. That's right.
Easy.
You guys get the easy ride. We got the difficult stuff.
Yeah. I will be smiling for the whole episode here.
Right. Well, we've got some questions in the queue. We could get started.
I'm just going to go top down and we'll just get cracking. And as we said, get your cute questions in the chat. Get them in early, and the sooner we're going to get to them. We do have a cutoff point during the show, so otherwise we're never going to end because people keep asking questions.
Yeah.
No.
Very dangerous.
Anyway,
yes.
Let's jump on our first one. Shiraman, am I pronouncing that right? I have no idea.
Shriman.
Yes. Yeah. Is there any Riverpod persistent state support? Do you know what? I've never seen anything like that. But go for it, Randall.
I mean, I take all the Riverpod questions sort of automatically because I kind of hang out with Remy a lot on his Discord, and I'm sitting there constantly staring at Riverpod and how cool it is to solve so many wonderful problems. There was going to be a persistent state support announced along with 2.0. But in terms of prioritization of features, it was deemed as being sort of below the cut line for the 2.0 announcement. We're already up to Riverpod 2.3, though. He's come up with some cool new stuff already. Persistent support has been brought in by third party. So, or I guess that fourth party, given that Riverpod's third party. Anyway, there have been some people that have written some nice mix-ins that you can use with Riverpod, but nothing formal in terms of that. The goal is eventually for there to be a more organized persistent state baked into Riverpod, rather than having to have everybody have ad hoc solutions. But for now, the ad hoc solutions are there. I wrote a little tool for one of my screencasts that basically wraps a provider around something that's in shared preferences and fetches it when it needs to and stores it when you update it. It works really well, and it was done with about 5 more lines of code than you would have had otherwise. So not bad stuff at all. So it is possible, doable. The hooks are all there. Just a matter of writing code. That's pretty much it.
There's also like just to be clear about this point, like so Riverpod, just for those that don't know, that Riverpod's a state management, as they're called, system. But persistent state in this case is the idea that you can leave your application, exit your app, and then return, and then that state is persisted and it comes back to how it was. So that has many forms, right? So there's actually something that is actually quite overlooked. It's definitely required by literally every app, but no one actually implements it. And that is, there's actually what's it called? State restoration is actually built into Flutter itself. There's restorable properties. There's a whole schema around that. I'm pretty sure there's documentation, not just the documentation on the actual, the types and so on inside of the repo, but I believe there's actual example, proper docs talking about it, why you should do it. And I give you an example of this. Let's say I'll give you an example of this. Let's say you go into use the image picker on Android, let's say, and you press it. So on your app, you want a button to pick an image. You press the button, it launches your image picker. And then what will happen is your main activity will get freed from memory, the previous activity, because it's now launched the gallery app, because the gallery use all these pictures, and it will shut down the main activity. Now, what Android does is it will ask the app to save its state, and then once you've picked an image and it jumps back to, it reloads the main activity and restores that state. And if you don't do that, your app will just boot up like it's the first time that you started the app up, like fresh from an icon launch, which is not the desirable effect. You want it to go back to the screen that they were on. If they're in like a wizard or something like that, you go back to where you were. And that's very much where this kind of notion of restorable state in Flutter comes from. But that is not the same. That is like UI state. It's not the same as sort of the backend state of Riverpod, which for most apps, the ones that I've built, I just go store it in a JSON file, right? You just have JSON, read a file, take it string from file, stick it in JSON.decode and then decode in your model object. And then same thing, when you make changes to your persistent state, you just store it to disk. Done. Like it is like a couple of functions. It's not like a couple of like 4-line functions. It's not difficult. But yeah, it's one of those things that you have to use your own app. If you're building your own app right now, like as a first-time app developer, make sure you use your own app and get other people you know to use your app that are interested, because it's not until you actually start using it. It's called dog fooding in the industry, but the idea that you try your own stuff. And the problem you also get as a developer is when you develop it yourself, because you know how it all works, you get blind to like the problems that it has and the changes that you need to make. So that's why it's really good to have someone outside of the development cycle to actually give you feedback, and just watch someone install the app and go. And when they start clicking, I don't know what, and they're just clicking on random things, they're not sure what to do. Well, now you should probably tell people a hint and say, oh, you should go set up your profile now, or whatever the steps are, right? And you can have those journeys handled. But yeah,
you start using phrases like, oh, that didn't work, but boy, that'll be hard to fix. I'll just ignore that for now. And you never get back to it. Oh, I've done this. Yeah. I've done this. Yes.
I mean, the other side of this is this happens in lots of production app environments, and that is whenever you come across like something, stick it to doing the code or a fix me or something. Always put that in there. That's your little reminder. You can do a search for grep for those. But also create a ticket in your system, even if it's a GitHub ticket and like that, you're never going to fix. Ticket it, enhancement for later, describe it, because then when you're bored or you've got something else to do or you're trying to fill up the pipeline, you can go there and start churning away at that, and that's called technical debt. That's called technical.
Or someone comes along and says, "How can I help you on this? You're doing such a good job with it." If you have all those tickets listed, you can say, "Go look at my GitHub. Go look at my tickets. Figure out what you can do. Any one of those will help. Thank you."
So there's
that's
actually
a great way to venture that. Make them public.
On every GitHub repo, there's a label called "Help Wanted." Yeah. And the notion behind that is exactly that. You put it on those issue tickets so you want people to help. And then if someone comes along, brilliant, it's done. Right? It's helped. So.
We're far afield from persistent state support here.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, let's move.
Yeah, Craig, that's the way it works with the Flutter core too, right? Aren't there issues and don't the developers watch for that?
Yeah, there's a tag called like I forget the exact phrasing, but it's something like agreeable for first timers. Which are specifically, it's like if you've never contributed before but you want to, this one's probably manageable.
Yeah, those are great stuff. I submitted an issue that became one of those that got fixed within a week. They ended up just in time for Flutter 2 to get pushed. So I'm like, wow, my issue went all the way through in a week.
And awesome. That's why they always say, folks on the actual engineering side, if a way to contribute is to file issues, document things like that. If you find a little wart and edge case, it's going to annoy other people too. And if you're the one who kind of lays on the grenade and actually takes the time to file the ticket, then you set it up to be fixed and you really are contributing.
The other thing is that the development team seems to watch the number of upticks for it too, because that also tells them a priority. Like a lot of people are concerned about this, not just this guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to mention here, just to be clear, do searches for tickets that already might solve your problem on the issue tickets. Try and come up with different synonyms and terminology to try and find if there's already an issue ticket. And if there is one that you did think you would have found if you didn't use one of these synonyms, go type something in there, right? Like go add a comment and say, oh, I've got the same problem, and describe it, right? Like add to those conversations. Just don't keep creating new tickets.
And my final other thought on contributing to Flutter, if you find a ticket that you want to solve, ask around about, like, post a comment about how you think you'd go about solving it, and just get somebody on the team who's got a lot of context and whatnot to give you a green light, like, yep, that seems like a good strategy, and then implement.
The other thing to mention is that there is the official Flutter Discord, and if you find an issue and you want some feedback, you can always post it in there and ask, is this good? Is this, can I go fix this ticket? You could literally put in there, I think I've got a solution. Is this approach the right one? Anyway. All right.
Not even solution. I mean, if you have anything in mind, which not might be right or wrong, just create a PR around that or create an issue around that and tell that Flutter team, okay, this is something which I think, having everyone's perspective might solve, a problem that our Flutter engines might not be able to solve. So
it's one of those things that if something's really hard to reproduce, again, just trying to reproduce something is also helpful, especially if you have an idea about what might be going wrong. Also, investigation, existing things that you might come across and go, oh, I'm going to try that out. And then if you investigate where the bug might be or what it might be causing it, you learn a lot about the Flutter's, framework and everything else. At the same time, you can feedback as a comment onto the existing issues. Okay, I see this line. This, I think, is the issue in this, file, whatever. And then someone from the team comes back. Brilliant, you found it. We're pretty sure that's it. And, it gets resolved. Anyway,
and it's like about 12 hours ago, I was trying to answer a question or help somebody diagnose a question, and it was about some sort of Windows build process. I know nothing about Windows, but I said, there's people here in Pound Windows, so go there and see if we can ask there. But I said, before you're going to be able to make any progress on this, you're going to need an MRE, a minimum reproducible example, so that we can run that specific code and see it blow up the same way on our machine. Now, if you can't publish your whole code, I understand that, but try to get it narrowed down. Because even if you then go and file an issue on the Flutter repo, they're going to ask for exactly that too. They're going to say, give me an MRE, or I'm just going to leave this as waiting on customer. And it's true. So learn also to pare down your problems to something that's tiny, so that we can look at that and look at it from all angles, figure out how it's breaking stuff.
It's really, and sometimes it can be really hard to do that. So, the effort doesn't go unnoticed, of course. All right, let's move on. Let's get through some of these questions. We've got some more queuing up. Queue to get longer. Here we go.
Indeed.
I don't know if this is a question. DO versus HTTP.
I hear there's new news on that. So the news was a couple days ago, there was announced that DO lost its primary motivator and coordinator. And I understand, though, in the last 24 hours, somebody else has taken it over. I don't know the details. I wish I knew.
It is transferred to Flutter China.
Yeah, it
was Flutter China, though.
I thought earlier it was Flutter China, but it was created by someone else. Then it is transferred to Flutter China.
Okay.
That's what I found on GitHub. Yeah.
Okay, this happened in the last 24 hours because it was something just recently, right? Okay, all right.
Too much press news.
Much news.
By the way, if you ask me, DO versus HTTP, so my personal favorite is HTTP because it is very lightweight, and you don't. It is very lightweight, and it gets its work done right. There's nothing much you have to do with API calls. You get headers and everything else out there.
Right, and also to be clear, sorry, go ahead.
But sometimes we have to go towards DO because DO provides us a lot of other things. For example, one of them is you can add interceptor. So if you want some kind of that stuff, and then it has the object generator kind of thing as well. So if you're going towards that direction, then DO. Otherwise, HTTP is always best.
there's that thing like Dio does provide a layer on top of, basically uses HTTP up the hood. If anyone doesn't know, it uses HTTP up the hood.
Yeah.
Has to.
There's also two HTTP packages, the one that's built in, and then the actual, same as collection, same as many others. There's the one that's a pub package, and then there's one that's Dart HTTP. So you've got the one that actually provides the HTTP raw level framework, which is all about streams of bytes. And then you've got the HTTP package, which puts the layer on top, which lets you kind of deal with the request response sort of way of doing it. It's a lot easier.
Right.
But yeah, I've used both, and I have to say, Dio is nice, and it does help solve that problem a bit easier. But at the same time, most of the times of what I want to do using HTTP allows me to better craft what I'm trying to do. It feels like it's a lot tighter. I don't know. It's not that complicated, right? To actually do what you want to do with a HTTP package. So, like, let's say again, like the interceptor piece. Well, I make all my API calls use the one function to make the actual request, and then that can then act as an interceptor, just adds the headers that it wants to add, and then performs the request. It's not, like having. There is that kind of thing, right? You can add libraries and add extra complexity to your app. And unless someone understands that library, it can become difficult. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but that's always something you have to think about when adding packages to your app, right? Adding extra complexity.
And just a moment, you mentioned that this is package HTTP. It actually is in the pub. And I just wanted, since we have Craig here, I wanted to ask him this as well. So I got feedback a couple days ago that Flutter didn't have anything built in because everything you really want to do, you have to go to the pub for. And I said, you do realize that there are a few dozen pub packages that are managed by the Dart and Flutter core teams. Craig, that's right. And why is
that? So why are they outside of the Flutter SDK, I think is kind of what you're asking.
I guess so, yeah.
Or Dart SDK.
Yeah. Well, that is basically just iteration speed. It's way easier to ship an update to the collections library or the HTTP library, or even a lot of the Flutter plugins. If some API changes outside of Flutter and it breaks how this thing is working, it would be a real pain in the butt, like the file picker or something. It would really stink if a patch for that had to wait until the big Flutter version bump. Whereas if that's a dedicated package, the CI for it is way easier. An engineer can just pop in, very quickly iterate on it, and release a version bump of that with a patch. It takes a day, maybe, depending on the complexity of the bug. Whereas it's a months-long process to get something into, end developers' hands via the Flutter SDK, and same with Dart. So for a lot of those things, it's like, they could be in there, but if you need a patch, you'd get it way more slowly if they were in the core SDK.
I think the other advantage is that packages can have a different deprecation cycle. They can have a different breaking changes cycle, because for have a breaking change in Flutter, you've got to go to 4, whereas a different thing in package HTTP can break between version 17 and version 18 of HTTP.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the other side of the same coin for sure. Just more nimble, it allows for greater flexibility, greater agility. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Thanks.
I just
wanted to share a story about Dio. Yeah, I just wanted to share a story about Dio. I mean, it was very strange, but there was a situation happening where I was calling an API from Dio, and it was returning me an error. And then I checked into if the Dio is getting response or not, and yes, it was getting a response. And I was very surprised, and I was not able to find out the answer. And in the end, I had to write that API with HTTP.
So it doesn't do everything.
So yeah, this is managed by Dart.dev. This is the HTTP package. You've obviously got the sort of HTTP like functions libraries in Dart.io, and there's also it's called, was it client, right? I think there's one called client somewhere. I don't know, HTTP client, that's the one. Yeah. So here's the client library. This is the raw level one that you can use, and you have to like transform all your bytes and do all this kind of craziness. There is also a Dart HTML version of HTTP client, which means that on web, it will use the cross, what's it called, XHR, XML HTTP request, whatever it is, the back Ajax basically is what's the term anyway. But all that's kind of managed for you. If you use the HTTP package, it will switch between them appropriately, do that for you. All you do is create a HTTP client. Also, just briefly, something else that I wanted to mention here is this HTTP package uses an entire HTTP stack written in Dart, right? It does not use any native code. And then those that use 4 sockets at the end of it that go across the network use native code. There's also 2 libraries, though, that are currently labs, which are Cupertino HTTP. And this is specifically for, funny enough, iOS. And this allows you to go more in depth and more direct to the system, allows you to do like VPNs and proxies and Wi-Fi blocking and captivity portals and all that kind of extra stuff that's specific to that platform. And then there's also ChromeNet HTTP, which is also the basically the same thing, but for Android. So these all exist. And just to speak about what Craig was just saying, yeah, you have the Dart team packages, and you've got the official Dart dev core packages. There's also tools.dart.dev and labs.dart.dev for all those experimental packages. You can just go look up one of these publishers, and you'll see all those packages that are owned by the Dart tools team. Right, there you go. So, yeah. You can go through these and start looking at them. So for when you need it, you've got it. But yeah, anyway, there you go. All right, let's. We spent way too long on these beginning questions.
we'll never get done now.
Let's crack on. Okay, so great. Gabriel asks, what motivates you to do these lives? I am very impressed and grateful for the knowledge you provide. Live streams. Yeah.
I like my live.
Yeah, I like my live. What motivates you? The awesomeness of the crowd, obviously, right?
Yeah, it's the crowd.
Your viewers. I don't know, actually. Like we've always. I mean, we started up the Flutter community stuff. Many years ago. Me, Scott, and a few others. And it's always been a thing. Humpday was actually a Zoom chat originally, and then we moved it up to YouTube. And how long has it been on YouTube now? A couple of years? No, 2, 3. I don't even know anymore. Like the years seem to be dashing past. I think when did I start Flutter? Like 4 or 5 years ago. I don't even know when it was. When was it alpha? I don't know. Too long ago. So, but yeah, no. I mean, Craig, what motivates you to do live streams? The job.
I think it's fun to views. I think it's fun to interact with the crowd, and I love to answer. I have different folks that I mentor just in my personal life, help get into tech. I just think it's really fun to talk about technology and, explain things that I understand decently well.
I mean, if you like the topic, you're going to want to talk about it, right? It's just like there's a reason why you go to meetups, the reason why you have all these networking events and so on. Hopefully you enjoy it.
It's also fun to watch your work be magnified, in that I can announce on a social media channel about how to solve a particular problem, and all of a sudden I hear other people quoting that to other people. And so it's like my one answer has now answered the problem for tens to hundreds to thousands of people. Like the future builder problem that we eventually had to redo the video for. But, the future builder problem was something that I answered many, many moons ago. And people keep quoting my video of it over and over again because and so it's amplified. It's been downloaded thousands of times now just because people keep talking about my answer to it.
Let's hope you didn't do anything wrong. Hey, Scott joins us.
Why do we do it? Why do we do it? Self-destructive tendencies. Glutton for punishment. Self-destructive. Yeah. No, it's nice to be able to help people. And when we first started, really, there was no support structure. So in part, we did it for ourselves. That there wasn't anybody else to talk to. So we started talking to each other, and then realized that we would get more help if we opened it up to others, and it would be nice to have others benefit from the things we've been learning, because most people were using just Stack Overflow and Gitter at that time. So then we opened up the Zoom where people could come in, as Simon said, and then it turned into this mess. But one other thing too, regarding helping people, something I've been noticing more, that that I'm sitting around sick instead of being on camera. A lot of the things that people are talking about in chat are really extremely specific, that need code examples and are much better suited to Stack Overflow. Why is my code doing X is not really something this format is well suited for. But general, general things about like what's coming up in Dart 3 or packages, or I'm using this package and it looks like there's a bug. Did anybody else run into this? I mean, those are great questions. Right?
To be honest though, the questions that Scott's just pointing out, there is we can give you like some hints, right? But there's no way we're going to be able to solve it without like
true. But it's turning in 90% of the questions.
Yeah.
But people are like, I mean, if they're not getting answers on other platforms and they find out any live, video going on, so they were like, okay, let's ask it here. They might be able to help me out. So yeah, it is kind of desperate question that they wanted to, solve it.
One other thing real quick before I sign back off and go lay down on the couch, because I'm testing negative now anyway, but I still feel sick. Did you Google it first?
Yeah.
That's the first thing I want to know. Did you Google it? Because some of these questions, I'm highlighting them and I just put it in Google and I hit enter, and you get a long list of things. And it's like one that just came up recently. It's, why is this happening in Flutter? So I highlighted it. I put it in Google. I hit enter, and it turns out there's like 4 pages in Google results saying this is an Android issue that happens before the activity's fired up.
Right,
so
go like
not an Flutter issue.
Go lie down and get better so we can have you back on the show. Yeah. Hope you feel better.
So,
Scott. Yes, exactly.
So you want me to go away so I can come back? Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Robert, yeah, did you Bing it? Works good too.
Yeah.
Hey, Microsoft's not the enemy.
No.
They're working on the foldables.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Try to stay on topic. I suppose it is nice to also give like an opinion about something. That it's nice to like Google something and see something, but also get another person's opinion on whatever the problem is. Is kind of Anyway, let's move on. Right. Next.
Somebody commented on my video there. That's nice. Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah. It's quite common actually. I've seen this so many that issue, and the issue we were just talking about with Stream Builder and Future Builder is when someone puts a function call that returns a future in their build, in the future build, and what happens then is every single time build is run, it makes a new future, and therefore it starts fresh and it uses the initial state as the initial thing to build with. Then it goes to loading, then it loads your data. So basically, every single time you do a build, you maybe get a spinner come up on the screen. It's really frustrating. And then this happens, especially if you nest 2 stream builders in each other or future builders, somewhere in the hierarchy, because when one rebuilds, it's going to have to rebuild the other stream. And you kind of get this like bing bong effect. So yeah, there is actually, me and Rando we're talking about adding, doing a PR that adds a create field to Future Builder and Stream Builder, which is specifically for this use case where it would return a function that returns a future, and that's very much like a future provider or that kind of thing, where you always have a create statement to do it. Anyway,
yeah,
problem for another time. Right, let's move on. Next question. Mito, is there any reason why Flutter has an inbuilt image widget but no inbuilt video or audio widget? Craig, why doesn't it do it?
That is a good question. I know video is the story for video is a lot harder. I mean, I could venture a guess, which is that displaying an image is a lot simpler and less dependent on the platform than video and audio. But the story, especially for video, really should be better than it is. Audio, I think, works just fine with packages. And I forget, those might be managed by Google. They might be managed by external things.
You got the official Flutter video underscore player package, and that's the one that's run by the Flutter team. There's no audio package run by the Flutter team yet, and I don't think there ever will be. Well, not in the near timeline, at least. It is that kind of thing, right? Like, so images, since we're having to draw to the screen anyway, and we have to, and we're dealing with pixels, dealing with adding like an image decoding libraries into the Flutter, and displaying those pixels is very easy. Video is not just images like a flick book, right? It's way more complicated than that. So so video, and that adds doing video and audio leads specifically into operating system subsystem for dealing with streaming of data quite heavily, and then and also the GPU in terms of trying to decode those things, video specifically, efficiently. So it's a much harder proposition. I mean, literally, there's entire products that just do those individual things, right? Like, so yeah.
One thing I would say, kind of zooming out a little bit, is if a package is maintained by, if it says flutter.dev or dart.dev as the maintainer of the package, just consider it built in, but it has a more flexible release schedule. That's it. But it is functionally a built-in thing.
Part of the, I'm just going to go like a bit into technical detail on that image widget. Just thinking, part of the reason why it's built in is because images are uploaded to GPU. It's kind of like a fundamental premise of the way that rendering works. So it has to be kind of be built in. It couldn't be a separate package. But yeah, I mean, we never know what the future holds, right? So we'll see.
I think there might be one more reason of doing this, and that is if you add video package in Flutter SDK, then it might increase app size or SDK size. And video is something which is not used by all apps, but image is something being used by almost 100% apps. So that might be one good reason to not add.
I want a text mode app that's just like console. Like you install it from the Play Store. It's just like ASCII only, right? Will that take you back to the 80s? No, don't do that. I'm joking. Right. Well, that's interesting. My mouse has suddenly stopped working, so this is going to be a short stream. Oh, it's working. Fixed. Right.
Use your backup mouse. Backup mouse.
No, right. All right. Eli says, love seeing all the Dash plushies in people's streams. Any chance they're available for purchase somewhere?
Go to Scott.
Where's your Dash? Craig, where's your Dash?
Go to Simon's house. Go to Simon's house. Oh, no.
Mine are not in arm's reach. They're not for sale. They're not for sale. They are for giveaway at events and for contributions, and they're not in a store currently, and I don't think they will be.
Not sold in stores.
Yes.
Which is normally
a lie. Those things are sold in a store.
What was it when you buy like a multi-pack of drinks? They have like not to be sold separately.
Yeah.
Right. All right, let's move. Right. Okello? Is there a way to solve dynamic to string is not a substitute of type to string when you have a callback in a generic class?
Code better.
Well, that's interesting. There's no. I mean, is there a way to solve this is not a subtype? So you're actually getting a compile error. I mean, it's not wrong. So what you're doing there is what you call like an upcast, right? So you can take any type and make it dynamic, but you cannot take dynamic and make it any type. Strictly speaking,
it sounds like a thing.
So quickly, I was going to say quickly. If you've got a generic class, if you've got a generic class, you should have a T. That T should be what you use in place of type. And now you've strongly typed it, but it has a dynamic nature that you can make a generic class and and so on. And that's your basically try to avoid dynamic. There's certain situations where dynamic is required, but just try and avoid it, and you will have no problems.
Yep. That's what I was going to say. Nope, 100%.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Generic class.
Yep.
So yeah,
it's probably because they handed some sort of they have a callback. They used a callback somewhere, but they didn't give a strong type on the callback parameter, and so it can't fit those together very well. It's got to be able to squish your callback into the slot that's being provided. Like, for example, a validator for a form has to have a string as its input because it's going to hand the value to you as a string, a nullable string. And so you have to give it a callback that can accept a nullable string as its parameter.
And also, if there are multiple types or multiple kind of outputs that you're getting, then you can create a generic, a different class that can handle these multiple types. For example, if we are doing API call, then there are two states, a result and error. So we cannot keep a dynamic there. We should create another class which can handle both types. It's a trap.
It's a trap. It's a trap. I was going to just quickly share something. So what Randall was just talking about is this kind of thing where you can define a custom type, and then like, I know this is like a function, right? So we can have a function t blah, right? So now that's a generic type, not a generic class. And now you can actually have I don't know, my class. This is just really ridiculous. So that has a generic, right? And in here, you can actually have your, let's say you in the constructor, you pass in class this dot callback, and then we have final like callback t. And this enforces, so these two t's are not the same. So this could be e. This is just a letter, right? This is just like a placeholder that represents the type to be put here. So in this case, when you use this type alias right here, what you're effectively doing is putting whatever generic that you pass in on your class right here, meaning this callback has to be of type whatever t is here that you've passed in. So if you declare like an instance of this equal class I'm an int, right? Then the callback that I'm going to get has to have an int as its value, right? Like whatever. That makes sense to anyone. Hopefully that gets the point across. Right, anyway, I'll shut up. Right, let's get back to it. Live coding, all fun.
Yes.
No, that was good. That was really good.
Yeah. He does that all the time. I don't know. We can't stop him from doing that.
I have the power. Right.
That and live web searches. His specialty is live searches while we're talking about something.
Yeah.
Skills. Very much your skills.
Boolean, I love the name, asks, how do I see what packages are using a dependency of a specific version? I'm having a conflict between path 1.82 and 1.83. Ooh, it's even worse when we get those circular conflict problems. Ooh, that's really horrible.
Dependency overrides.
You go down, you get conflict with one thing. You go up, you get conflict with another, and you're like,
dependency overrides can get you even further down the rabbit hole. Not necessarily back out, but at least it's a way to try to accommodate some of them.
I'm actually looking at just thinking about that, like.
So there's a command that's really helpful for this. It's the deps command on the pub tool. I just put a link in the chat. I don't know if I have link posting privileges. That may never appear.
I will. If you put it in the internal chat, I can make sure it gets published. Yeah. Also, we can make sure you have those.
So for this, for this case, we don't have any kind of straightforward answers, and dependency overrides, as Randall said. It's good, but again, it's kind of trap, because once you start using it, you will keep using it, as long as you are in no trouble. What I did was I forked that particular package and I updated dependencies there by my own, and then I used my path my GitHub path in the PubSpec. So it solved me, you know, that
Oh yeah, like
inconsistency kind of thing.
fork the package. Yeah.
Yeah, fork the package and update dependencies by you, so that you don't have to worry. If there is any new update is coming along the way or anything is happening on the other world, your application will be safe.
There's a lot of independent package publishers that obviously not the main team, but I think even they would like this. Like you update dependencies in your own fork, you do a PR back to their repo, and then they get they can publish the next version, right? Like with the fix in it. Right? So yeah. Anyway, I think
the question was how to figure out which one, and the solutions that are being talked about, the rectifications, overrides, and actually forking it require first discovering which one. And I think the deps command is a good place to start.
Cool.
Yeah. I found out the other day, actually something that's immaterial to this directly, but you've got pubs. You have dependency overrides in your PubSpec file. There's actually now that was merged into the Dart pub tool. There's now PubSpec_overrides.yaml, and if you add that to your project, you can now have your dependency overrides in there. Then you can then not check that in, so you can put in your git ignore, and this way overrides that's specific to you as the developer can be put there, so they're not in the actual main repo, which is actually really helpful, and that's how Melos now works. So
yeah, Melos creates those, which is really nice. So you can have this interdependency in a mono repo between the various packages. Like I'm looking at the Riverpod now has something like 17 packages inside the mono repo, and it is all full of these dependency overrides to basically say you don't want to get the pub version, you want to get the version that's 2 up and 1 over, right here, and it just handles all that for you. These dependency overrides can add not only version numbers but also locations, which is really cool.
The problem we've got. Sorry, I'm gonna. This is like an active feedback to Craig actually. Now, the problem you have with that situation, the problem you have with that situation that I found is that you when you act on a local path, you don't give it a version, and it doesn't check the version in the path, right? And because pub doesn't do that, you can publish your package, and then when it publishes and you then use it from the pub, it's using the wrong subversions of all the separate packages, right? So you can get to a situation where when you build locally, it works, and when you build when you use it from pub, it doesn't work.
I thought if you had a path dependency, you couldn't publish to pub.
No, that's what we're saying. That's what I'm trying to say. So in PubSpec overrides, you can do that because they're not published, right? They're separate. So basically what we're saying is on your local machine, you use the overrides. So that means you're using your local path overrides.
Yeah.
But when you publish, it's using the version. Now, if you forget to update the version, or you don't update, they get out of sync, and then it screws everything up, and you don't know until it's published and someone uses it. I mean,
works on my machine. Works on my machine.
I mean, obviously the answer is unit tests or something. But it feels to me like it's probably like if you add a version tag to a path-based dependency, there should be like it can check that in the PubSpec YAML, and you can kind of keep that up to date. It feels like a little minor change would go a long way.
I wonder if this suggests that folks are using the PubSpec override differently than how it was intended, because I'm sure opening up this gap was not the plan, and so I'm wondering if the vision for this originally was different than what I'm now hearing. So yeah, I'll talk to folks about that. That's interesting.
Oh, just fine. Mention it. Anyway, right. Next question, Mitho.
Yep.
I'll let you start going. Go on, Ran. I'll let you start taking.
Oh, you're gonna let me read on Flutter life cycles. On Flutter life cycles. So Mitho or something like that. Are there any scenarios that require us to use the dirty or clean methods? Dirty method, clean method? I don't know what that is.
I think he's talking about on dependency changed or something like that.
Yeah, there's like different marks of dirty and clean for elements in, when you call set state, the element behind that state object is marked dirty. And then there isn't maybe there's a clean method. I thought the code just said is dirty equals false.
Yeah, it's just like, basically you say mark needs rebuild, and that sets a flag called dirty, and that way the next time build occurs, it knows that this is to be rebuilt, this widget. The same thing happens on layout and paint. There's mark needs paint and mark needs layout, which do the same thing. Strictly speaking, there's no reason for most apps to even touch them. If you're doing custom elements and you're doing some custom weird build cycle thing that you need to do, then yes, you're probably gonna need it. But that is like use cases like teeny tiny compared to the standard, which is just compose your thing of multiple widgets, right?
Or you just pull down Riverpod and use that for all that management for you. You don't have to even think about dirty and clean and all that stuff. Just use Riverpod.
I think the answer is even more of a no. Assuming this is what Emtho is talking about, I think the answer is even more of a no than what Simon was suggesting, which was 99.99% no. I don't think you want to be rewriting those kind of core methods of the element class. Like they're be dragons.
Yeah.
Assuming that's what you're asking.
I don't think you're saying rewrite, but using them. There's no reason to like mark something.
Yeah, he's asking
they're used in these other methods. Like there's the update method that actually is what calls these. So if you're calling them, then you're kind of not using the update method. And like I would advise against that.
Yeah. It's like even though you could call the same thing, set state calls. Set state adds a couple of extra layers to make sure you're not doing it inside of itself already. Whereas if you just call mark needs build, it just does it and doesn't tell you that you've written bad code. Yeah. Yep.
For those that want to follow on with what we're talking about, I just post a link to the documentation in the chat.
And Craig's talk. You should probably look to that again.
Oh yeah, the old life cycle of a widget talk.
Yes, it's a great talk. We talked about it a couple times before here. Yes.
Yeah, actually, every stream, I think past 3 streams has been recommended somewhere.
Your favorite, Craig.
Just keep pumping those views.
Yeah. We do what we can.
Nice.
Next question, I guess.
Yep.
Go on, Randall. I'll leave it.
How do we for Funway coding? I can actually read that. Those are 2 straight normal words I can read. How do we solve the error? Log abort error. The play request was interrupted by a call to pause. What package? I'm imagining it's some sort of video or audio player.
Yeah, looks like a video.
I mean, doesn't the error tell everything? The play to request was interrupted by a call to pause. So
somebody paused to play. It seems
you cause the pause function to happen after playing, so the play was interrupted. Yeah, I don't think there's an error here. I think that, again, like logging. There's another thing to mention here, right? So logging can be done as an informative way to debug. In this case, it's telling you that the play was aborted because someone called pause, which could be standard procedure. Right? I don't know if you're hearing audio. Maybe that's not happening. In which case, you're calling pause straight after play at some point. The way I suggest you debug this, no matter what library it is put breakpoints on those 2 lines, or even better, put some print statements with stack trace. It's funny enough, a print statement with stack trace.current can go a long way. So what happens is when you'll get a lot of print statements with a lot of information, but when you go back through it, you'll go, oh, the pause function was called from this tree of stack trace of functions. You go, oh, I didn't mean to call it from there straight after I did that, or vice versa. But definitely part of developing is understanding time domain, right? Like programs are not like programs don't get as simple as a recipe that goes step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It gets way more complicated than that, and time ends up being, especially when you start doing with asynchronous stuff that happens multiple things at the same time. Yeah, time becomes all the more important as a domain to think about with debugging.
The stack trace is really important for that kind of diagnostics. And in fact, Riverpod 2.0, one of the things that got changed in async error was that the async error now has a mandatory stack trace parameter instead of it being optional, and like it was before. And of course, the internal documentation on it just says, yeah, if you don't have one, just use stack trace current. At least you get something out of it. But it's mandatory in building an async error to be able to say where it came from, so that you can have that kind of a logging and history. So pretty cool.
I'm not sure. I know the Flutter framework solved a bug around this, which was if you had some asynchronous code and it crashed, it would go down the call stack and it would just like end, say this is where your asynchronous code was started from. Right? There was no like, you wouldn't get the entire tree of before the asynchronous code started, right? I believe that in certain scenarios, I can't remember the details. I think it's not even a problem now. And I know that in the framework, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say a widget crashes. It tells you where you constructed that widget from, right? It tells you what the stack trace was for where the widget was constructed. It just does that. But when you build the widget, it records stack trace.current. And if there's a crash, it outputs that as part of the log. And that is so helpful as a debugging mechanism. And you can put that in your own code super easy. So yeah, just recording the stack trace, the current stack tracing at the right time can really help. Especially sometimes, when it's time domain. Go on.
Sometimes in stack trace, we have to add lines, right? For example, if I'm building my own plugin, then I have to add the stack trace in my each function. And I was debugging an issue in one of the package, and they forgot or they intended to not add stack trace in 5 or 6 functions. And I was like, okay, I reached to this point, but this error is coming from somewhere else. And now I don't have any other place to look at that. And later I found out, okay, they did not added the stack trace thing in 5 to 6 functions, and the error is coming from one of them functions. So yeah, sometimes if you're not getting an answer from the stack trace, go into code and go line by line and find out, okay, in how many functions this particular error is traversing through. So yeah, just to add on top of stack trace.
This is where it just shows something that you just reminded me of, actually something that happens quite a lot quickly in code. Let me get rid of that thing so Craig's not covered. Yeah, so you might get like an asynchronous function, right? In which case this, you want it to, let's say, final res equals await perform request, I don't know, right? Return res, or you can say return here, right? Versus, and then down here we can have another future in form request. Now this is quite common. So let's just say this is some asynchronous function that returns. A lot of people do this. In this situation, they remove the async and remove the await. And what you've done is you've made a function that returns this future here that's returned by this function, which is perfectly fine. But what you don't realize is this is no longer in the stack trace, because what's happening here is do request is returning that result, and then that is being called for the perform request. So by removing the async and await, you've removed the fact that do request was being called from your stack trace. It will look like it skipped it. It'll be very confusing for you. So yeah, having async and await in here, although it adds another coroutine kind of thing inside of Dart's management system for accountability, this definitely adds and fixes the stack trace problems. When you have missing lines from your stack trace, if you've noticed that issue, this is what's causing it. You've removed the fact that you're awaiting on a response, right?
And that's actually a lint now that suggests that you don't do that. But if you need it for debugging, put it in.
Yeah. All right. Next. Valorant clips. Will there be any update on integration testing in future?
I hope so.
There's updates all the time, isn't there, to the package? And what was the package called before it's called integration testing? Did it have like?
Not sure. I'm guessing they're asking about like a specific update, but we need to know more.
Yeah. There will be updates, I'm sure.
Okay, well, I must be mixed up in I'm definitely mixed up in the way that this works. Hang on, let me just get you guys' opinion on this. Make sure. What is the package then? Because was this the old package 22 months ago? Integration_test. Did it get renamed? I'm trying to remember.
Deprecated. Well, it got brought into the SDK. It's no longer separate.
Oh, it got brought. That's what it was. Yep. I think I'm going to fold this back to you, Craig, and maybe say it should tell you that. Oh, it has it. Right there.
It says it right there. I don't know. English is there.
So yeah, but the point here is yes, you have to still do it because it's an integrated package like localization stuff. You have to do the SDK definition.
Yeah. You do speak English in England, right?
English? What's English? I have no idea. I'm not speaking. I just want to bring this up. Christian's been a real big supporter in doing chapters, and we'll talk. Christian, hit me up on Twitter, and we can get you access to add them directly. Anyway, right. He's been adding the chapter markers for the previous videos. So thank you again, Christian. All right, Farmway Coding says, how do we solve the error in Flame Engine? Oh, it's the same thing, and it was Flame Engine. Yeah. I'm going to suggest you go tweet the Flame Engine authors.
Or file an issue on their GitHub.
Yeah. Help wanted. Paco says, question, any pointers to testing push notifications, redirections with integration tests?
Wow.
That's an integration test, all right.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right?
But my question is here is, how do you test push notifications? I mean, the automatic test. Do you have?
Yeah. Well, I was about to say that. So the way it's kind of curious, right? The way that you actually test. The way push notifications work, I'm going to speak from an Android perspective. That's my knowledge base. But from that perspective, it's just a launch of an intent, and you could use the standard Android stuff to verify that your activity is getting started from that intent. You could also then, in your integration test, fire the intent. So we've now got the JNI Gen stuff, which could let you call the activity intent stuff directly. There's also the intent_plus package, which lets you fire intents. But basically, the idea is that in your test, you're not going off to you're not saying to Google, send me a push notification and waiting for the push notification to receive. That'd be ridiculous in integration test. Trust me. But what you want to do is just fire the intent that you'd normally be receiving from the platform when you get a push notification. Then you can verify that your activity has started and that the data passed in the intent is what you're receiving inside your app. It deep links into the right content. You can test that flow that way.
But you can do that via ADB Logcat, right? So do you have access of ADB Logcat via integration testing us?
Sorry, ADB Logcat?
I mean, the intent that you're talking about to fire, right?
Oh, ADB intent, but there's no need to do that, right? So ADB intent, if you're developing push notifications, you normally use the ADB command to fake the intents. But since your integration test is running on the device, it already has access to the Android system to fire intent. So you can just do it as part of your actual code of your integration test, is what I'm saying. But that's the way I would do it. Although, to be honest, I'm just trying to think if I've ever actually done integration tests for that. I think I have, but it's not directly push, right? You're just testing intent and data. I know how you do it on iOS either. Like, I guess you just start a URL, don't you? Right? I mean,
I was having this discussion with somebody yesterday about how deeply do you test, and at some point you have to mock from the interface layer up to the rest of your code with some sort of simulated event to make sure that if that event came in, everything else works. But you don't have to simulate or trigger the stuff behind it because we count on the fact that stuff works already, that the technology behind this event generation has been tested by people smarter than me, So then we can say it's like trying to test to make sure that 2 + 3 is 5. You don't need to make tests like that unless you're just getting paid by the test. Okay, you don't need to do that.
It's the same thing I've seen before. People add packages to their code, and then they're trying to test the integration with that package. But the package has tests.
Yeah,
do that, right? That's not what you should not be wasting your time doing that, because when that package changes, those are going to break. I mean, like validate your use case of your app, your code, right?
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Yes.
All right, Gabriel, is there any way you can adopt me as an apprentice? I'm just curious, of course. Just keep tuning in. That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
Keep asking questions. Keep showing up to the meetings here. You know,
we're always Flutter Apprentice.
Yep. Yeah, the Flutter Apprentice book, the Dart Apprentice books by Code. They used to be called Ray Wenderlich.
Yep.
Those are great books.
Cool.
To be honest, if you're talking about learning, just for a second, I'm self-taught. In all the computer stuff that I know, I'm self-taught. I helped a few friends through university, right? And I self-taught myself all that stuff. So it's like you can do it. And I couldn't give you a learning path or anything like that. But the thing is, keep yourself curious and keep looking into things. See how far the rabbit hole goes, right? And then make yourself a reading list.
I'll take it one step further than that. Read everything you can, yes, just like Simon said, but also get into the habit of telling it to other people. So help them out. You will learn far more about the edges of your knowledge by trying to teach it to somebody else. And that's one of the main benefits. People say, why do I spend all this time hanging out on all these social channels trying to answer questions about Flutter? It's because every day that I do that, I'm learning something new about Flutter and Dart and the ecosystem and everything. And I'm going to be that much more valuable the next day to my clients and to myself as I'm developing things. So learn by teaching, always.
Plus one to that.
Yeah. +1, +4.
Yeah.
Mythos says, are there any performance issues of creating or using isolates above the number of cores available on the device?
So depending on what those isolates are doing. It would depend on what those isolates are doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If they're CPU bound,
Yeah, let me give you an example of what Craig's talking about. Let's say your isolate is going over the network or reading from a file from the hard drive, right? At some point, it has an await in that isolate, has an await, and that means the system puts that isolate essentially in a waiting mode, waiting for the network to come back with the data or wait for the file system to come back. And then there's time for something else to work. And that's literally how the main isolate works when we have all these asyncs and awaits. It's the reason why we can have the UI and do all these animations and everything else. It's split up into chunks. And all these things happen very quickly. And this is the nature of like multi-threading, right? Like your system. I reckon, here's the thing I'm going to tell you right now, Mitho. Go find your task manager or activity monitor or whatever it is on your device and go look at the number of threads, add the threads column or whatever. Go look at the number of threads in each of the processes and see how many are active right now. I bet you've got 2,000, 10,000 active on your machine right now. It's ridiculous. So using more, there's obviously like a gradient here, right? So you can use more. And at some point, you're going to use so many that device is going to start what's called it's not throttling. It's there's no time for it. Basically, swapping the memory to disk, and it'll just go down.
That word is swapping.
Yeah, thrashing, memory thrashing is the technical term. There you go. So that's when basically, if you want to know what that means, it's when a process needs to swap memory out to disk to get more memory, and to get more memory has to swap more out to disk. So basically, it's going from disk to memory to disk to memory, or on everything it does. And at that point, it's completely underperforming, and it just goes slower because it's got a lot of overhead. So memory thrashing. Got to look that one up.
Yeah. So basically, using a lot of isolates may have some issues on performance.
Cool. And before we go to the next question, Craig says he's got to leave soon. He didn't tell you that, told us that. But there's a question here for Craig, and it's about the Mason show. So let's take that right now. And there's 2 parts to it. So let's read the 2 parts.
Craig, when I tried to create Mason on a separate folder rather than part of a Flutter project, I'm getting Dart errors, even though Mason make is working. Well, All right, part 2. I am unable to use analysis.yaml to get the errors since it is not part of a Flutter project. Can we go back to part 1?
Yeah.
All right. So Mason create, I think, is the command. So in a separate folder, rather than part. My husky is starting to sing right here.
He said,
yeah, he's like, I want to go on a walk. Rather than part of a Flutter project, I'm getting Dart errors. So I guess my first question is, what Dart errors? That would be probably that'll be needed.
I've got an idea, Craig, if you don't mind me chiming in.
Sure, yeah.
If the Dart errors are just like highlighting errors when you're looking at the code, it's because you literally have to create, like in VS Code or IntelliJ or something, you add a module in VS in I don't know about VS Code, but in IntelliJ you would go project structure, file project structure, add module, and you choose the folder that you're talking about, the separate folder, and then that would essentially or open up the folder as a project, and then it will then say, do you want to activate Dart, and away you go. So
I think he's asking that he might be working on some Dart project, which is not a Flutter project, and he's using Mason there, and he's getting issues out there.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you're in an IDE, and you're looking at the code, it uses the IDE information about the project to kind of see that. So if you're going to get Dart errors if it can't resolve the dependencies because it's not in the project. Whereas if you use Mason make or use Dart compile or whatever on the command line, it's going to work because it's a pub spec file. It knows how to do that. So yeah, I think I'd just say open it as a project. Open that folder as a project.
And I announced at the beginning of the show that I actually built a Mason thing. And one of the first things I did was I followed the directions that said first step is do Mason init. And I think it builds enough stuff that when I opened VS Code on that folder right there, it knew that it was a Dart folder, because I had to add an analysis options file to make sure to exclude my components that were being put inside Dart files and PubSpec, because it wasn't in the right place to be able to do a proper analysis on it without freaking out. So I had to add some exclude paths to exclude my bricks that I built below that Mason init directory. So I think the key is make sure you do a Mason init and make sure you open VS Code or your IDE directly on that folder that you just made, and then make your bricks inside that with Mason create.
Yeah. Right. Sorry, Craig had to go. He's got a lovely husky. He needs to go walk. So
Yes.
Find pictures of him apparently on Craig's Instagram. Anyway,
and we have cut off questions for today. Come back in 167 hours if you want to get your questions in. We have still 18 questions in the queue, so that's why we had to cut off, because we only got so much time. So take it away, Simon.
All right, cool. Let's crack on then. Anyway, let's get rid of that question. Right, next one.
It is for me.
Yeah, with Riverpod, is it better to call the provider once for the whole screen and pass parameters to stateless widgets, or to have widgets themselves get the info they need directly from the provider?
The latter will mean, so having individual widgets go to the provider means that you can be more selective about what rebuilds. Whereas if you're watching it in a top level that's handing data down, sometimes you're going to get different patterns of rebuilding that might be more expensive. So I tend to put them pushed down as far as I can, asking for just the data that they need. And one trick with that with Riverpod is to use the .select that allows you to extract a part of the data and only be notified when that part of the data changes.
Like one field of a model object, you can do a select on it, and therefore, if that field changes, its value changes when a real rebuild happens, it then rebuilds your widget.
Right. Or a value becomes greater than 20 versus not greater than 20. You can select on a Boolean expression, and it works really cool.
Oh, it's really good. It doesn't matter if they're stateless either. Like that. So the way that, just to be clear, the way that the provider works, when you look up a provider, the context that is the element for the widget that you're on records that provider as a dependency. And at that point, whenever the build happens again, it doesn't have to go up the tree to get it. So from a non-rebuild perspective, that was what Randall was saying. There is definitely a trade-off between memory for each individual versus the top level. But to be honest, it's not a big issue, and being more selective over your builds is definitely a better idea. Yeah.
So anyway. I do as Randall said that I try to find out which at what particular point the widget is rebuilding itself. Until that point, I will try to get the provider via context, and after that point, I will pass a particular variable as a parameter, because below that line they do not need provider or any context kind of thing. They just need data to be built out.
Right.
You just reminded me though, there's also the inside the performance Flutter performance tab in IntelliJ with the plugin or Dart Dev Tools, there's a tick box that says enable reporting of widget builds. And if you run your app with that turned on, you actually get like a little list of all the widgets in your app and how often they rebuild. And you can see the counts per frame, the last build, how many of them built, and the total number. So as you use your app, you can see if you're getting unnecessary rebuilds of certain widgets, and you can go in and look at why and optimize those specifically. Again, we say pre-optimization is a path of all evil. It's that kind of thing of like you put all this work ahead of time, not realizing that those aren't the performance gains you need. So it's nice you ask this question, but also don't go refactoring your entire app right now. You may find that it works perfectly fine as it is right now. Leave it alone, right? So just saying, don't just because we give you some advice, don't go changing your entire apps, right? Just think about it for the future, or see if it actually makes test the performance, right? Validate the performance change, and is it worthwhile for you to make those code changes across your app? All right, let's move on. Next question. Is there a way to query the MIME types of a mobile device can handle, so I can use that to create an accept header with HTML as a fallback to send a REST endpoint that serves files? A REST endpoint that serves files. Interesting. So I see what you said. So basically, just to kind of let everyone in on what Christian's trying to do here. When you go to a web page and it makes a HTTP call, it sends what's called an accept header, and that contains a list of MIME types. MIME types are normally, they're expressed in several different ways, but MIME type is normally the primary type / the subtype. So, for example, for a JPEG image, it's image/JPEG. For GIF, it's image/GIF. For PNG, it's image/PNG. So this tells you it's an image, and then the subtype, the exact format of that image. This happens for all media, for all internet data. And this has been around as a concept in email and web from the very day one. Without it, I'm sure it would be in a hell of a difficult place, right? We'd be doing DOS extensions or something weird. So MIME types are lovely, right? In Unix and Linux systems, there's actually ect MIMEs, which is like the global list of MIME types, but it's just used as an index lookup. There's no way of querying specifically that the device can handle certain types. It's down to the operating system. So Ubuntu or whatever would have a specific way of saying what installed apps can support what types of MIME. Now, you said you want to know, is there a way of doing it? Now, what you can't do like an overall query. So you used to, at least on Android, be able to query all the activities and all their intent filters and actually gather that knowledge. You cannot do that anymore. It's been restricted. It was being used by and abused by various people, so they removed that functionality. So in general, I'd say you can't see if other apps on the device that you're on, when it comes to mobile specifically, can do that. However, if you're sending a RESTful API call from within your app, it's up to you to support those things. So you could say image/star because you could support images, and if your app can load a video file, image/MPEG-4, and so on, right? I think you have to make an educated guess as to what it can serve. I would be more interested about like a bit more about the use case here. The other one is I'll mention this because I've used this practically in the past. I'll give an example here, like PDF. You're on an Android or iOS device, let's just say Android device, and you've got a PDF file, you want to display it to the user. So you want to know, does the device have a PDF viewer? You can actually query the operating system specifically saying, is there any activities that can serve application/PDF, something like that, PDF-document MIME type? And if so, then you have the application package name, and then you can specifically launch that application with the data path of where the PDF file is. So there's specific use cases where that works, but I don't think there's a generic way you could do that.
But I think this particular feature to get the particular the app ID, I think this is kind of blocked or it is removed in the newer version. So if your application is doing something and if you upload that on Play Store will ask you to remove that particular thing. So it is something like query, query
It's
the
query
app ID.
packages. Query all
Yeah.
packages is
that is I think removed. Yeah.
And they've removed it now. You cannot. They don't want you to. You can still kind of use it, but they just it's going to be enforced soon. Anyway, I would see Chris has replied, the customer wants documents to be open with native apps, not just inside the app. I would say that record the document. Let's say you get a list of documents they can choose from to download. Return in that list the list of MIME types, and then query each individual MIME type with the operating system. And then if the operating system returns back it has a viewer for that, then you could display that item, that document, as one that can be opened, or put a little icon next to it. But there's no way of you sending a list of up front, right? You would have to get the ones that you want to show and use and then query them individually against the operating system.
Yeah, right.
That's what I'd say. All right. Yeah, gets there. Right. Next one. Rashmi. Using shell router bottom navbar, how to handle nested routing using GoRouter. I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're asking here. You'd have to read it. I mean, you create a shell route. In fact, there's an example of shell route with GoRouter. You create a shell route and you have it return your widget, and the child is the navigator. And when you use like context.go, it will navigate within that nested route. If you want multiple ones, you can do that. But to use multiple nested routes, what you're essentially doing is you have to create a router widget, and you give it each one a different GoRouter instance with a different subpath on it, and it gets really complicated. I want to know like what the use case is, but more specifics really. There's not help. It's just not enough to go on to give you a direct answer. There's quite a few examples to shell route and with GoRouter, and I think there's a few tutorials out there I've seen. I know a few people that were actually working on some. So if they're not out now, they're all out soon. Anything you want to add, guys?
I don't use GoRouter or shell router, so I think from my side.
All right, Mala, how do you see the role of widget tests and integration tests in testing? When is it useful to use widget and integration tests?
More than people do.
Yes. I mean, so there's a certain type of testing you forgot to mention here, Mala. Unit tests.
Yeah, unit tests.
So when you're testing functionality, like of a class or some component of your app, you're calling that unit testing. Specifically when you're using the rendering and the actual visual toolkit of Flutter, that's a widget test. And then when you want to test multiple components together in situ, that is on device, that's an integration test. Now, integration test normally means you're running the real code on a real device or on an emulated device, like it's running in the right environment, whereas widget tests actually run on your local desktop machine or laptop. They don't actually run in an emulator. The same goes for unit tests. They run on your actual device and not on the device. So integration tests are specific on device. However, you still write unit tests that do integration testing. And what I mean by that is they test multiple components together to make sure the flow of data works. That is what you would call also an integration test. Yeah, I mean, you can also set up what's called test harnesses as well, which are like mechanisms that allow you to essentially like fake HTTP requests and get responses back, so that you can test the whole flow of information within your application. But how? Sorry, so to come back, how do we see the role of widget testing, integration testing? Important.
The role can be
Important.
like, let's say that we have multiple teams. Let's say we have 5 to 6 teams working on a product, but different feature, and there is some change done by someone in a particular module. And if you have proper integration testing in place, so by just one click and one round of testing, you can find out if every package or every module is working fine with each other. So it helps you to save a lot of time uh, during release, and making sure that you have confidence in the release build. And if you talk about widget tests, so this is something I thought, I'm thinking of about it for last 3 months, that how we can make widget tests better, or is widget tests better for my development. And what I came around is, yes, it is good, because you might have multiple device size, and there might be some cases where your widget is breaking on multiple device, because in Android, specific in Android, we have multiple device size with multiple custom ROMs
We
and
have that
multiple
in iOS now
configurations.
a lot.
I mean, for iOS, you don't have to worry, because you have 4 to 5 device size, and yeah, they works fine. I mean, you just have to worry about Android. So yeah, widget testing is good there. Yeah, it is good to have, and yeah, it will save you
Yeah.
it will save a lot of time. And I coin a term known as confidence. So you will always have high confidence while doing releases.
Well, this is it. Like, it's the reason why you have code coverage, right? The idea of code coverage is to give you that confidence that your code has been tested,
Yeah.
right? So I think, like, again, it's the role of tests are there to validate that the code is behaving as you intended it, right? There's something about integration testing, I'd say, that's missed. So when you build your code and you're just doing like this class, you're thinking about it in situ, right? Just this one piece of code, and you can test it and you can understand it. But as more and more classes and more objects and more of your code interacts, you get what's called emergent behavior. Emergent behavior is when literally it does something that you thought was impossible because you did not program it to work that way. But somehow when these things work in cooperation together, it has a new behavior. And now you have to think about those edge cases and work out why they're happening, and then you solve them. Integration tests are those kind of things where you're testing multiple components together that find those emergent behaviors and the edge cases that they cause and can help you resolve them. And there's another thing that can come from that. But yeah, confidence in the code is, especially when you've got a lot of, especially, I mean, in any code base, this is good. But when you're working with multiple people, I say multiple people, but if you have any sort of 2 developers working, they could be working on the class, and if they make changes to that, it might break your code over here because there's some like interaction somewhere down the data path somewhere, right? So the idea here is that with those test cases in place, before that code is merged, it can run those tests and validate that they did not break the main branch that the other developers are working from. And that's very important in terms of smooth development, and you're not all just trying to like fix everyone's problems everyone's causing, right? Yeah.
Okay, we've hit the 2 minutes per question mark right here, so please budget 2 minutes per answer.
Yeah, that's not going to happen, right?
Never.
Mythos says some people refer to Flutter as a framework, others refer to UI toolkit. Are there significant technical difference between the two perspectives? No.
I'll take this. So I refer Flutter as framework and UI toolkit, both. So what I think is, Dart is a language and Flutter is a framework built upon it. So when I say framework, that means you have more custom features that are built by using the language. So that is about the framework. And if you come towards the UI toolkit, so yeah, Flutter is UI toolkit because it helps you to build UI for this multiple kind of platforms. It does not provide you the platform support that Android, Kotlin, or iOS Swift might provide you. So that's why it is a UI toolkit built as a framework on that language.
Yeah. Go exactly. I was gonna say, like we always said this, right? Like it's like Dart is never gonna replace Android. It works on top of Android. People go, oh, when's Flutter gonna replace Android? And it's like never gonna happen because it uses the system. It's like GPS. We're not gonna have GPS as part of the Flutter system. It's not what it's built for. That's
when
why
will Flutter when will Flutter replace batteries? I want to know that. Right. When will Flutter replace batteries and chargers? That would be nice.
So UI Toolkit mainly was referred to by Flutter and the community as a way of helping people understand that problem of like they're thinking of it being like something you build apps in, which it is, but it's not the entirety of the build app process. It will still uses the platform. Okay. And I want to also mention this framework thing, right? You said, are there significant differences between those two perspectives? In programming, we have a problem, and the problem is terminology, and the problem is language, because you need to refer to multiple things that are all essentially the same thing, right? It's the reason why we come up with patterns for programming, right? So we can like talk about things in a more complex way. So what is the difference between what is the difference between a module, a package, and a framework?
And right? A plugin.
Or plugin, yeah. Like these are very much fundamentally the same thing with slight differences, right? So and this is what so framework is something that you're building on top of. It's the framework, right? But essentially it is a package of its own. It's self-contained. It's a module, right? And if it interacts with the platform some way, you might call it a plugin. There's just we have this thing where, especially when you're building an app, that you need to use similar terminology, lots of synonyms, to sort of break down the components into logical units, because you have to separate to get them to interact. But you can't call everything manager or service, right? Right? It just becomes untenable. So I don't know.
It's a source of tribalism and religion and all sorts of things, and just disagreeing over no point whatsoever. It's really weird, but it's true. We're humans. That's how we work.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I just came up with this thing that Flutter UI toolkit is a solution. So a solution that can build application for multiple platforms.
A solution. Yes, there we go.
Everything's a solution for something.
Right.
Yeah, and Flutter framework is the end product that Google is building. So, solution and product.
Anyway, now let's get back to, is MVVM or MVC better?
Oh,
no. See, that's.
I want to know, like, how much you think of your time as a developer is spent naming things? Because a big proportion, I think, of developers' time is just trying to work out the right name for things and the right names for variables and everything, right? It's like the reason why suddenly variables are named IT, like single letters, is because I can't be bothered naming that. Like, it's just like
right. Okay, move on. Right. Let's move. Let's move.
Next question.
Next.
When the app starts, a white screen shows before the splash screen. How do I fix that? That is actually correct, because the white screen is the splash screen. Your app splash screen that you've made in Flutter is not the splash screen. There you go.
That is the first screen.
So, it's your first screen of your app. So natively, every app on every platform, when it has to loads, and it has a splash screen. It has something that has to display to the user whilst the app is being loaded from disk and into memory and started up. So there's actually a package called, is it Flutter Native Splash Screen? Something like that?
Native Splash Screen. And I was just going to say, come on, Simon, why aren't you Googling for that already? Native Splash Screen. And we'll have the URL in 20 seconds in Simon's normal skill set.
It's in the chat.
Post it.
So I'll bring this actually up on screen. There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is great. Flutter Native Splash. This is it.
Yeah. So here you go. Here's that. Basically, the idea is that before your first app your screen shows, the system is going to show that splash screen, and then this is like a little plugin. You add a bit to your pub spec or to another file, and you say that what color and on Android what picture to use, and all this kind of like fun stuff. And you run your generation command, and it generates all the native files in the right iOS and Android folders to do the splash screen. And there's actually there's also Android 12. This has got new support for splashes and blah blah blah, and so on. Anyway, read the docs. This is a great package. There's also Flutter launcher icons, right? I think that's what it's called. Flutter launcher icons. That's on. And this one does a very similar thing. This will generate basically you add Flutter icons to your pub spec or a separate YAML file, give it your instructions, and then when you run your generate command, it will actually generate all the icons in the appropriate folders and the appropriate resolutions for the platforms. And again, it just gets rid of that whole headache from sort of developing. But that's what you want to do. Now, strictly speaking, you can on Android tell it to not display splash screen, but in which case it just looks like it pauses when you start because you're not going to see it tick on the screen. It's better to put the native splash screen on there, then also make your first splash screen of your Flutter be exactly the same. It could just be a colored background, and then fade your logo in Flutter. So you get this really nice transition from the native into the Flutter world.
Yep.
You can animate it away. You can go from a still to an animation as long as the still you're replacing it with is exactly the same size and shape.
Yeah, exactly the same size and shape, which you can make those assumptions. I won't go into that, but basically you can say like the icon that loads in the middle, so when you launch an app on Android, it kind of zooms out from the icon, and if you keep the same icon, it kind of looks like it moves to the center of the screen, and then if you keep that in your Flutter project, then do a scale. It looks like it splashes out, so you kind of get this nice kind of like move in and then splash out to the screen. But you can do all that kind of stuff using the new Animate package, for example. Anyway,
Flutter Animate. Yes.
Yeah, Flutter Animate. Right.
Yeah.
Hashan, I'm using Flutter local notifications package for schedule notifications and navigate to specific screen on tap, but it's not passing payload when app is terminated, so it only launched the app.
That's sad.
I think it is the issue with notification package, basically it is an issue with the notification provider, because if you use custom notification provider, from Clever Tap or some other kind of companies. So they resolve this particular issues in their package. For example, Branch. If you use Branch as a notification provider, they have resolved this issue. So there is a kind of persistent thing that.
Do you mean like a push notification? Because this is just local notifications. But I mean, like so when you create a notification on Android, you pass it what's called a pending intent, and the system actually records that. And then so if your app is shut down and someone taps on it, it actually launches the pending intent as an intent. That's called like unpacking it, and it then runs that intent and it will match to your main activity and so on and so forth. That all depends on the parameters that you pass. And the same thing goes on iOS. You can have it with a URL with a custom schema, and it can launch your app. So honestly, this could just be the way that you've configured your several things like your manifest and so several problems. The best thing I would suggest for you to do is create a new project, brand new Flutter app using Flutter Create, add the package, do a quick test. If it still has a problem, you've made a reproduction. Raise a ticket on Flutter local notifications. If, however, it does not have the problem that you're speaking of, then what you've now done is you now know there's some other code in your application that is causing that problem. And it's probably a modification to the native components, like the main activity or the manifest or something. If that is the problem, you can delete the Android folder, run Flutter create dot, and with whatever parameters you want for the package name, and it will recreate the Android folder with the latest changes, and maybe that helps solve the problem. But it's difficult to diagnose these things. the also just mentioned Vivek mentioned earlier ADB log cap. So if this is an Android specific issue you're having here, in your if you in the Android toolkit, the Android SDK that you get, there's a command called ADB. So if you add the platform tools folder and the tools folder from the SDK into your path environment variable, then you just open up your terminal or your command prompt and type ADB, and it will find the Android debug bridge, which is what it stands for, and it will launch like the info. So if you type ADB space logcat, it's a sub command, it will actually launch the log of your device. It's literally like a big text file, imagine it as that. And as things happen on your device, as activities launch and close and notifications are tapped on, you'll see every single step of what's happening. And that can help you so much in debugging these native problems. So, but what you're talking about there is not a Flutter specific issue, but a native issue. And honestly, the only way to do this is to kind of look at what's going on and try and figure it out. There's definitely no reason why it wouldn't be passing the payload. So I will mention, though, that forcefully terminating your app or swiping it away is the same as telling the operating system you don't care about this anymore, and that has a different on Android, and that has a different behavior to if it's running in the background, or you get something that starts a notification from some background process, not the foreground activity. So maybe something else is going on there, but honestly, I suspect your payload is probably running the payload and then not matching the activity because it's not running, or some other like intent filter thing going on. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
1 minute per question now. 1 minute per question. Let's go.
Funway Coding says how to create a progress indicator in Flame.
Create it.
Don't. Yeah. I mean, like you're talking about like, you know, the spinning wheels, right? I mean, you create frames of animation. Maybe if you wanted to like make a eight dots going around, you could just create a frame for each one, and then as time progresses, as you get like the update command with delta as the time, so you just use that to indicate how far forward you are, and then you choose the next frame as appropriate, right? You just use that with a divide operator into the number of frames that you have, and that tells you your frame index to choose to display in your sub element or whatever it's called, sub widget. You can also do things like just rendering one. So this is another thing that actually happened. I think it was in Cordova. I remember seeing this first a long time ago. But you can have like a faded. You can just make an image of a faded circle as it is like a gradient, and then as it rotates, so you just rotate the image. So you just draw it with a different rotation. I think you can set the rotation on your element in Flame, and it looks like it's like animating around. You're just rotating it, but it looks really cool as an animation. But honestly, go look up at indicators, and you can find lots of different tricks to building indicators. But yeah, it's just
there's a whole package. There's a whole package of Flutter native animations and progress bars and things like that. Actually, multiple packages that do that. But I remember seeing one in particular that I used for one client many moons ago.
Yeah, I do remember like saying that there was like a package that actually had a ton of really cool like progress indicators in it.
Yeah.
Don't ask me which one it was now, but
it's in the pub. Just go find it. It's in the pub. Pub as a search. We don't have to be your search for you.
Right. Next one. Why Valorant? Why integration testing package got discontinued?
Because now absorbed.
We just said that earlier. So we might this might come in after we were talking about that. So yeah.
Yep.
Techist. If I use Firebase Stream Builder is called every second, Firebase DB read count increases. Yes. So the idea is that no, sorry, if you're using the built-in Firebase Stream Builder, you mean, then no, because it doesn't or every second.
It's talking about the problem of that I talk about, which is the stream being rebuilt.
Well, yeah, but I think there's a slightly different thing here, right? If you're rebuilding your widget every second, then it's not necessarily going to get new data. However, if you go request new data and the new data gets read, then you're going to increase your read count. It's going to cost you money. Yes.
So if there is a data change in backend, then if there is a data change in backend, then it will be read count. But if it is the same data, then it will fetch the data from the local DB that Firebase.
The other idea is definitely don't poll for data. Don't every second request for new data, like read your document. You can get a stream of a document, but if that document is updated on every second, then yes, you're going to get a recount every second. Let's say you've got 100. Let's say you've got 100 people. Let's say you've got 100 people reading one document. It changes every second. That's 100 reads a second you're going to get. It adds up. It does. I've seen Firebase projects with billions of reads. Yeah, and the cost goes like that as well. so especially if you're dealing with high numbers. So don't do that. All right, next question. Why does Firebase network calls not show in Flutter dev calls? Because they're native. They're, as I said, so Dart implements its own network stack in your Flutter code. And when you use Firebase, it actually goes to the plugin. That is the Android plugin on Android. It'll use their stuff. And if it goes to iOS, it'll use the iOS one. So if you want to look at those network calls, you can use the Android and iOS debug tools to do that. And you run, once you've built your Flutter project once, you can then run it from Xcode on iOS and Android Studio on Android to get the information. But to be honest, they're not part of that stack. I think there's probably something better that the team, again, they're not at that level. They're not network calls. There is an interesting thing you can do, depending on what you're trying to debug, VG. There's timeline task. I think it's built into the timeline task. Yeah. So in the Dart developer package, let me bring this up on stream. In the Dart developer package, there's a bunch of like tools and things to help you connect up and debug things. One of this timeline task and add to the timer and timer as well. So if you do a network request, you're going to do timer start sync and finish sync, or this time sync and run something. And what this will do is it will add in on the chart of your running chart of your app inside the dev tools, you'll get this being logged, and you can see how long it took, when it started, when it stopped. And then this might, if you're trying to like work out maybe like how these things are interacting or anything else, that can help. I don't think I've seen a generic way of user tag. Oh look, group samples on the DevTools CPU profiler. So there you go. That might help. I have no idea. I've never used it. Max tags. Anyway, but the point here is metrics. It's all been wiped out. Metrics deprecated be removed. Oh, in Dart 3. Oh, is exactly what I was going to recommend. That's no good. So basically, gauge flow. Maybe they've actually changed it. So basically, I was going to say count and gauge. These things that basically, if you want to know how many network calls per second you're doing, then what you can do is do a counter, and then you report that back to the dev tools. And then in the dev tools, you'll see the counter, and you can see what the average number per second or per hour you're doing of some operation. That can help in terms of debugging. I don't know, maybe that helps. Next one. When do you expect Impeller to come out of beta? When it's finished?
When it's done. But no sooner.
No sooner. To be clear, although Flutter and Randall's wearing a Flutter top, this is, and Vivek's a Flutter developer expert. This is purely community effort. We don't work for the Flutter team. We do not work for Google. Okay, so we have no charge over deadlines. We don't even know any of that stuff. So when does it expect to come out?
So there is no deadline, but I think as far as what was announced in Flutter Forward, so we can expect it by end of this year. But again, this is kind of expectation.
Yep.
So what is there's actually notes on Flutter.dev for their release cycle. Was it stable every quarter, right? Is it stable every quarter? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we get stable release every quarter, and we get, I think it's a monthly beta release. I think that's what I remember. But in general, when they feel it's ready, it will come out, and that might be any one of those stable releases. So we have three more, I guess, this year. And then, yeah, maybe it's one of those. Who knows? They are fixing, as someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Raf or someone else, I mentioned that they're filing impeller bugs. They get fixed immediately. They're really hot on the impeller stuff. They're really trying to get it out the door as the next greatest thing. So in that sense, they're on top of all the impeller issues, right? So hopefully it'll come out beta soon. But yeah, who knows?
But I think impeller will come out first for iOS, and after a few months
Yes.
it will come for Android.
Well, however long it takes them to do the Android implementation.
Yes.
And then the Windows, and then the every other platform, right? But iOS and Mac will be the first primary targets, right? Anyway, what is the use of block transformers? From Trainer Talk, this is what is the use of block transformers? I have seen it in action. Sorry, I have not seen it in action anywhere, so I'm curious. Well, so you're talking about, so first of all, block as the schema, as the way of doing things, is actually doesn't have transformers, right? Block transformer is either a separate package. I'm assuming it's probably in, I have not seen them myself. It's probably in Felix's package.
Yeah.
The block and block, those two packages, their implementation.
Flutter block. Yeah, it's in Flutter block package.
Yeah. And so you have stream transformers and you have other transformers, and they are literally to transform data. Think of like a list, and you perform a map function. It transforms one list into the resulting of your map function into another list, right? This is it. So block in Felix's way has events and it has state. An event outputs a state. So I'm assuming a block transformer is allowing you to essentially to attach something to that and have another step to your transformation of block to state. But I've never used them, so I'm just guessing. Have you guys used them? No.
I never used it, but I just had tried and I didn't find out any use case for me, so I just left it out.
To me, the use case is a lot of blocks. So when I've used streams for this kind of thing, for managing data flow, you set up a pipeline that is a transformation pipeline. So during the steps, you filter out nulls, then you validate that they're in range or between this, and you do this and do that, and so you break your data processing into these stages of your pipeline. So when data flows through, it will pass away through, and at one point you might want to transform it. So for example, you might get a series of IDs for articles, right? And then, or model objects or something, right? And then when you go through the pipeline, each one of those IDs gets transformed into the model object by reading them from the database. And that's the sort of necessary of what a transform might do. And then you that goes down the line, and then at the end of it, you create a stream, and that goes into a stream builder. And now you can build your UI from that series, from an input of IDs in your widget to a series of models that you display on the screen. So in that situation, I assume it's the same thing. Blocks can be linked together. So one block listens to another block that listens to another block. And at some point, to link two blocks together, you might need to transform the state of one into an event for another, or that kind of thing. And in that situation, I can see this being useful, if that's what it is. I'm just guessing. All right. Hopefully that helps. Right, let's move on.
Yeah, I hope so.
Dinesh, wondering if Dart FFI to C or Rust degrade the overall performance of apps in any way, and running all the native calls in a separate isolate. Is there any other best practices? Okay, so at the moment, it's not possible to do asynchronous calls. You can, but you need to have custom C code. I won't go into that right now. And so moving to an isolate is a great idea because it keeps the main thread performant, and then when the background isolate can basically block on performing the native code, because the native code normally is blocking. It doesn't do things asynchronous by nature. So wondering if Dart FFI to C or using FFI to interact with Rust degrades the overall performance of an app in any way. It really depends on the app. For example, let's say, and this is about just. Let me just be clear. This has nothing to do with FFI, and this is just to do with programming. Okay. So, for example, if you had to go through every pixel of an image and check to see if it's green. If it's green, replace it from the associated picture of a background, and you get what Randall's got in his thing there, where you got the green screen kind of approach, right? In that kind of notion, the more operations you're performing per pixel, and the larger number of pixels are, the longer it's going to take, right? And so the closer that you can get to the metal, that is, closer you can get to looking at that color and changing that color, the less number of operations for each pixel you're doing, the faster it's going to be. So, for example, in your use case, if you were checking each pixel, if the pixel check and the replacement was happening in C code, and for every pixel you're calling an FFI function, well, you're calling, let's say it's a 1 megapixel image, you're calling 1 million function calls to FFI, and the overhead associated with making those function calls, and that adds up. Whereas if I was to send the image in one FFI call and then do it all in C code, suddenly I've only got the overhead of doing one FFI call, right? And that's the thing you've got to think about. This is all programming. This happens if you're doing streaming of data, or if anything, right? If individual operations is going to take a lot longer because there's overhead, right? There's additional things the computer has to do, versus if you did it all in one little for loop, right? Like in line. So this actually, in fact, this you can go, if you want to look up a bit about this, you can call it loop unrolling. It's actually something that a compiler does, which is where if you have a loop like a for loop, literally the compiler will copy the code from within the for loop multiple times over and remove the for loop from your code when it compiles it, because it's more performant not to loop. It's more performant just to repeat the same thing with different indexes, for example. And then that is intelligently the compiler will work out what's more optimal, right? But this kind of thing happens all the time. Anyway, right, back to the point, the overall performance. It will degrade the overall performance because you're doing extra things. But that's the same as if you were now doing a different type of call, right? So there's no real difference, right?
I have little different perspective here. So let's say that if you are doing very same thing in Kotlin, for example, let's say that calculating 2 plus 3 equals to 5. So if you're doing that particular thing in FFI, that is in C, versus the platform call in Kotlin. So if you're doing particular same thing, then the FFI is faster because you are talking with the C, and C is much faster than Kotlin, Java, or Swift. So yeah, in that case, the Dart FFI is better. And as you said, the coding issue. If you have coding issue, then then it will be there.
Yes. So what you're talking about is using the native code. Again, it kind of comes to the point you're closer, what's called closer to the metal, right? And the term is used to denote the hierarchy and stack of the computer system. So at the very fun, I'm just going to give you a little lesson. This is not to you, Vivek, but to the audience. Give a little lesson here and say like, so the very fundamental layer, your computer is transistors, right, which are in the CPU. Then you get like a level above that, and you get the machine, the microcodes that the CPU runs to change those ones and zeros. And then above that, you get your microcode, you get your machine code, which is also called assembly, right? Assembly is the source code, the English terms used for the machine code. That's the ones and zeros instructions. And then above that, you then get compilers that compile code to native machine code. That is what Dart does, right? So Dart compiles your code to machine code, and the machine code runs directly on the CPU. And then you get what Kotlin does. So Kotlin is part of what's called a JVM language. It runs in the Java virtual machine. So basically, going down the top, your Android code that's Kotlin gets compiled by the JVM at runtime normally. There's ahead of time. There's all sorts of different things, but compiled. And then that is compiled to machine code, and that machine code then runs the microcodes, and the microcodes then change the binary. So it kind of goes down. So there's an extra level on top, basically, of what Dart normally does, which makes it slightly less efficient. And I say slightly less efficient because, yes, it is less efficient overall. And if you're trying to do a bajillion operations a second, you're going to notice that difference, right? But for the most part, it's not noticeable. It's the number of operations you do. So it's not the stack, it's the number of operations. For example, is if you're calling over a method channel, you have to serialize all your parameters. You have to then into JSON, let's say, like it's an over, you have to deserialize them on the native platform. Now suddenly you've added all this extra overhead per function call. That is what's going to slow it down. Not necessarily like the layers right here, right? However, it's always nice to know that you're closer to the metal because you're going to get better performance and better power optimization because it's doing less. So anyway, but back to C or Rust, exactly the same thing. They're both C, Rust, and Dart are essentially the same in terms of level there. They're all compiled to machine code, and that machine code is what runs on the CPU. However, Dart has a, we call it the VM, but it's really a runtime environment. It's also called the runtime. And that is the little bit of code that has the garbage collector and the things that work the language and do async and await and all that kind of stuff. That gets shipped as part of your app, and that's when that gets compiled into machine code as well. That is the bit that makes Dart a higher level language than C. C, you're interacting directly with the memory and the CPU, and that is why it's really easy to shoot yourself in the foot with C, because you put in the wrong memory address and then you read from invalid memory that has been allocated, and the process and the CPU will just blow up. The CPU will literally cause a fault. The OS picks up the fault and shuts down your app. You've done a seg fault, which is a segmentation fault, which is the standard terminology for that. So it's really easy to cause problems. Now, Rust is a better language. It's called a systems level language than C because it's what's called, it has safety. So the actual language inherently has safety. It's still at the same level, but it has safety that you cannot access at compile time. It will check to make sure you don't access outside your memory, and it has all these extra checks and balances in place so that it has that. So it has those extra things. Anyway, I'll shut up now. But anyway, the point here is, there's your lesson. Right, there you go. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, there you go. Just for context, I'm building a decentralized wallet. Ooh. The blockchain implementation is written in Rust. My Dart code, my Dart wrapping is basically FFI to Rust implementation. Perfect way of doing it. Wonderful. I'll tell you why. Because you're making your high level stuff in a UI toolkit that is effective at that use case, and you're using the low level language Rust for the effective use case for dealing with the encryption, decryption, and hashing of the blockchain stuff. And you're making a very straightforward connection between the two directly and not going through another subsystem of serialization, deserialization. So wonderful. This is the way I would do it. There you go. Cool. Next question. Right, that's it. Robert says, is there any way to watch tests like in Rust? I've never didn't know you could do that, and only run the tests that are relevant to the code change. Ooh. Saw this in Rust where they can test code besides implementation code. Oh, interesting. I can see that. So basically, if you change the implementation, you can then rerun the test that would normally test the implementation. That sounds really cool. That could be a package and a plugin. That for sure. That would be really helpful.
It would need analyzer support because you have to know which tests are actually tickling a particular set of code that you're now updating.
It wouldn't be too difficult to do that though, right? So currently there's actually a package in pub called Coverage, which actually gives you these statistics about what code path from some Dart code will cause what lines to actually be executed.
All right.
And touched, and then that way you could do basically a reverse lookup. So if those lines of code change, you know which test needs to be rerun. So yeah, you could definitely look at that. I think that'd be really cool.
Why don't you write it and publish it and let us talk about it once you're done.
Yeah, come on the show and we'll talk about it. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. Total invitation.
All right, next. Dinesh, I'm not sure if Flutter team intentionally made Flutter Web not screen scrapable, which is actually a good thing for content, but it's always stayed that way. First of all, so what he's talking about, so screens, just for those people that don't know, screen scraping is this notion of being able to like fetch a web page and capture the content from the HTML as if it was rendered on the screen. It's called that's called screen scrape. So you're capturing what's on the screen and getting the content out instead of calling an API and getting JSON or some strictly formatted content. So Screen scraping was used very often in the 90s when APIs weren't a thing. No one had APIs back in the early days, 2000s and the 90s and all that. You just had websites. And so the way you would interact with another website was you would make a HTTP request, download the HTML, and then do a grep and kind of like get the bit of using Perl regular expressions and get the
those scraping programs are almost always written in Perl as well.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yes. Perl. Yay, Perl.
It's literally, I think it was like the primary use case for Perl regular expressions. Anyway, in fact, if you compile, Dinesh, if you compile with the web renderer, so when you compile for Flutter Web, there's actually a renderer you can choose. So let me bring this up on the screen here. So the page, I'll pop the link in the chat here so everyone gets this. So the web renderers, and you see here you've got HTML and you've got Canvas Kit. So by default, Canvas Kit will be more optimal on certain devices, and HTML will be optimal on some other ones. And it automatically will build your app to support both, and then it will choose the right one at runtime. That's the default. However, you can force it to use HTML, or you can force it to use Canvas Kit by adding this additional parameter to your build command. All right. That's what I'm trying to get to this, because if you use the HTML renderer, it will render HTML. And what you're doing is screen scraping directly isn't the, I'm just going to carry on anyway, but screen scraping directly the thing that you're actually trying to solve here. It's you would normally use a browser. So modern screen scraping, because websites use dynamic HTML, right, which is a kind of this term where the website changes, not what's sent back from the server. Let's say Vue.js, all these other Next.js, Nuxt.js, all these other packages, they all modify the DOM tree at runtime. So the way you do screen scraping now is you actually host a small browser instance in your screen scraper or whatever, and you actually load the web page, and then once it's settled for a few seconds, you then capture the DOM tree, and that gives you the HTML, and then you can then get your content out of it. This is how Googlebot works. So this is literally how Googlebot works. So when we talk about the startup time of Flutter and how long it takes to download and load, it's too long. Googlebot will give up beforehand. That's why it's not SEO optimized, right? In the case of what you're talking about here with capturing content, you can use the HTML. You can use the HTML renderer, and that will mean that you can then highlight and copy and paste just like normal. The other thing you can do is now there's a selectable widget, selectable area. I forget if it's selectable area. I believe it's selectable area or region. Look it up. Selectable region. Let's have a quick look. I forget. Yeah, selectable region. Widget not selected by default. Wrapping a widget subtree with selectable region will enable the selection of that subtree. There you go. So basically, you wrap your entire subtree of your page in selectable region, and then all those things inside will become selectable, I guess. So here's an example of this. Look, I'm on a web page right now. Select this icon. There you go, and I can select it with my mouse, just like if it was part of the web page, and then I can copy it, right? So that's now been the solution to allowing people to copy and paste. And it's not, and again, it's not intentionally made not screen scrapable. It's just because Flutter renders it all UI, it's the same as rendering to a canvas. It renders all the pixels. Because not part of the browser doesn't know how to select that content. And now they've made that the link between the two bits, right? So it's not that way is the answer to your question, and you can go sort it out. There you go. Right.
One thing I would like to highlight here is that so Flutter renders on its own engine. For example, Skia. So if whatever you're seeing on web, if it is rendering on its custom thing, for example, Skia, and if your scrapper does not know how to scrap things from that rendering engine, then yeah, you cannot do that. Basically, a lot of scrappers are made for HTML, CSS kind of things. So
Yeah.
if anything else comes out in the way, then yeah, it creates some problem for scrappers.
So again, as we're saying, screen scraping of just requesting HTML from a website, that's not how it's done anymore. It's done with an instance of the browser. Even if you're using Skia and Canvas Kit to do the rendering, what your screen scraper would do is it would highlight and do like a mouse operation, essentially, that would highlight all the content of the page, and Flutter would respond with that, highlight the nodes, and then you do the keyboard copy operation, and it would copy that content out. But yeah, it's definitely not the same as like filtering with regex. It's definitely a lot more difficult, but this is just the nature of everything's now that more complicated, right? Like this would be the same with like Vue.js and so on. If you want to make your website more screen scrapable or want it to be more like that, we recommend Jasper. It's a package on Pub that is sort of better, better around interacting with the DOM tree. I'll just quickly bring it up here just so everyone knows what we're talking about. Spelling. Let's see. Here we go, Jasper. This package here. Jasper is .web framework, and if I go to like the examples, where the playground, so this entire website is written in Jasper, and I can highlight it just like a normal web page. And here's an example of how you write Jasper code. Just like you write widgets, you write what's called components. In this case, a DOM component with h1 tag with a child of text hello. And look, here's the output. It's a h1 tag with the content hello, and I can select it, and it's exactly the same as a normal web page. And then you can actually do more complex examples like this. And again, stateful components, they're stateful widget, behaves and feels very much like Flutter, very similar. And the end result is a web page with DOM objects that are selectable rather than like custom rendering. But you still need to know CSS. And here's an example. Here's the CSS for this page. And you might need to know HTML as well, essentially with manipulating the DOM. So it basically means you've got a Flutter style interaction with the DOM, and that sort of can be what people are looking for. That's not necessarily Flutter. Right. Next, final question. What are the tips for building logic for beginners? Good one. What are the tips for building logic? I mean, I guess
gates and OR gates.
Right. I'm pretty sure he means like design patterns, right? I would go look up design patterns and read up about them. And the thing is, you learn these concepts can be really hard to understand at a theoretical level. It's not until you feel them in action that you make some code around them and you run it and you put breakpoints and you debug it. Then you understand how it works, right? You actually can sort of visualize it and feel it. Personally, that's where I kind of come from. So I think like just like talking about a design pattern and showing like a diagram is not enough to really get you understanding like those kind of things. There's also like go read up algorithms. There's algorithms for sorting. There's algorithms for everything. Algorithm is just the nature of here's a series of operations to perform something, right? And it's simplified. But the point here is there's computing algorithms for absolutely everything. You could go look them up and try and implement them yourself, right? And then that will get you understanding logic and the beginnings of that kind of like how stuff works. But truthfully speaking, like, just when to use a switch, an if statement and all that kind of standard logic is just, you learn that by doing it, right?
Yeah. And as I've said on this show before, programming is both an art and a science. The science of it is studying the reference manuals, learning the basics about how the technology works. But like all art, the way you learn art is you study what people have produced with that art, and you learn to copy what they're doing initially, and you learn to start making the variations, and that becomes your art. So you need both of those. You need the science and you need the art. You've got to do both of those.
And it's also subjective, right? Like what I like and what I prefer is not the same what someone else is going to do, right? It's always opinionated, right? And this is why you have this is why you have the kind of religious wars, or whatever you would call them, about what language is best. And,
Emacs, Vim.
I know Emacs and Vim is the classic two text editors, and it's like, which one's better? And it's like, well, I use Vim, and Vim's so much better. It's easier.
Emacs.
So it's like that kind of like that kind of, and it's nonsensical as well, because it's like I always say, choose the right tool for the right job.
Right.
I would not use Flutter for low levels. You probably could use it for low levels, but you wouldn't, right? It's not the right tool. I would go use C or Rust and then use FFI. So it's like, choosing the right tool for the right job. And like, there's no beginner learn one thing and do everything, right? But Flutter is definitely getting close to that. Well, should I say Dart is definitely getting close to that.
I will say tech tips from Simon and Rendell, and go and do hackathon with those tips. You will learn it better way.
You have to challenge yourself, right? Like we said, I said this in every stream, and that is go find out how an audio player works, and on on whatever platform, and try and do it yourself. How do I do this? And take it step by step. And also, there's so many stuff is open source. Once you go find a package on Pub that you're using that does something, go look at how they built it, see how it works, understand it, open up in your editor, control click through, clone the repo, and then try and re-implement some stuff yourself. Like you learn by doing, right? You'll learn so much more. I think, again, it's like the answering questions, but yeah, it's like the doing, the actual studying of what you're of everything.
I said, like I said earlier, teaching as well. Also, being able to describe it to somebody else will in fact make you a much better programmer when you can actually explain to people why you're doing things a certain way.
Exactly.
I was having a conversation with someone else. It just reminded me, actually, right? Because it's one of those things that you're reading about all this stuff, and we're talking about these concepts. And because we've been doing it for so long, it's second nature to us, right? Like we say, design pattern this and machine code that, right? But the problem you've got is I would suggest people, whenever anyone says a term, we watch a YouTube video, whatever, they say a term, you're not sure what it is, write the term down, make yourself a reading list, and go to Wikipedia, look them up, or go online, read them up about what these things are. And what happens is, in your mind, you don't think there's applicability to that thing. Right? It might be an algorithm or some mathematician that did something, Boolean algebra, right? But the point here is you start learning about all these disparate topics, and what happens is this patchwork quilt builds up in your mind, but you don't realize it. And then what happens one day you read one topic and go, oh, that makes sense because of this, and because of this I know, and because of that I know. It all links together.
Yeah.
And you can feel like you're lost in the sea and lost at sea at the very beginning when you're learning all these individual topics, because you can't see the end, you can't see that horizon, like ending, right? And then you start like really bringing things together, and things start clicking, and that's when you kind of you start gaining momentum.
Yeah, right? It's like I never understood how to in Lisp, because I was doing coding in Emacs Lisp a lot. Couldn't really understand how to sort by a particular key. So I sort of invented a way to do that, and saw other people doing what's now called the decorate, sort, undecorate pattern. And when I got to Perl and I needed the same thing in Perl, I just was able to draw on what I had seen in Lisp to put the same thing in Perl. And then somebody named it after me for that particular pattern. They call it the Schwartzian transform. I did not name that. I'm not that vain, okay? When you guys out there secure that term. I did not name the Schwartzian transform. It's named after me, but it's not my name for that. I just went, these three things together make that thing work. That's all. There we go. That's the story. I'm sticking to it.
Nice,
yeah.
Nice.
So yeah. Anyway, right. I think we reached the end.
We're done.
Thank you, Vivek, for joining us. It's
thank you. You're welcome anytime. Yeah. And it's like
Thank
late.
you.
It's like 11 o'clock, midnight, something like that.
I know it's probably late for you. Yeah. Sorry.
So it's 1 a.m. here.
1 a.m. Oh man, thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you for staying around. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you so much, Simon Randall. Yeah, to bring me on one of the known Flutter community YouTube channel.
You're welcome. Right. Well, and I guess was it, Randall? We'll see you in 166 hours, is it?
Yep, 166 hours to go. See you right back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Right here. And we'll see if we can get some more people on. So, we'll see you then. All right. We're going to head off. Bye, everyone.
Bye.